He's a deviant, and he plays with dark magic. These are facts. And you always see these people who have these meteoric rises. Nobody's giving them, nobody's backing them. They just like they did it from the ground up. And the trade-off with that is you have to perpetuate.
The sentence is already collapsing. Everyone thought the scandal ended the moment Shawn Combs was locked inside a federal facility and the courtroom doors slammed shut. Case closed. Story over. Or at least, that's what the public believed. But now something strange is happening. Prison records are quietly shifting. Numbers are changing. And suddenly, the countdown toward freedom is moving faster. In just the past few hours, insiders began pointing to a subtle update buried inside the Bureau of Prison System. It's the kind of change most people would never notice, unless they were looking very closely. The new projected release date now reads April 25th, 2028, more than a month earlier than what everyone expected. And that single update is sending ripples through the entire case. Because dates inside the federal prison system don't just move on their own. When they change, it usually means that something happened behind the scenes. Combs is currently serving a 50-month federal sentence following a brutal 7-week trial that revolved around allegations of transporting individuals for paid encounters tied to the now infamous so-called freak-offs. Prosecutors pushed hard, demanding more than 11 years behind bars. But that's not what the judge handed down. Instead, the music mogul ended up in a low-security federal facility in New Jersey, a place far different from the nightmare prison many expected. According to reports, he spends his days working inside the chapel library and participating in institutional programs, including one that can potentially shave up to a full year off a federal sentence. On paper, that explains part of the timeline shift. But insiders say the clock shouldn't be moving this quickly. Because even with good time credits and rehabilitation programs, adjustments like this don't usually appear overnight. Yet the projected release date has already started creeping forward, quietly, almost like someone nudged the system. And when the clock inside the federal prison database starts moving like that, people on the inside usually know exactly why.
So we think that's just absolutely inconsistent with the jury's verdict. I mean, the jury's verdict was resoundingly clear. There was no trafficking, there was no racketeering, everything was consensual, everything was adult, which is why he was convicted only of the offense. What we feel happened today was that the judge acted as a 13th juror, yes, one that we did not choose, and that he second.
The official explanation arrives quickly. Clean, simple, almost too simple. According to updated Bureau of Prisons records, Shawn Combs is now scheduled for release on April 25th, 2028, more than 5 weeks earlier than the timeline that was circulating just a few months ago. The change didn't come with a press conference. No announcement. No headlines. It appeared quietly inside the federal inmate database. The same system reporters and legal observers constantly monitor whenever a high-profile inmate is involved. For most prisoners, a small adjustment like that barely registers. Dates shift all the time inside the federal system. Paperwork updates. Administrative credits get applied. Good time calculations change. But this case has never moved quietly. Combs was transferred to FCI Fort Dix in New Jersey after his sentencing in October. And almost immediately, the calendar around him started behaving strangely. First, the projected release date was May 8th, 2028. Then it suddenly jumped forward to June 4th. And just when observers thought the math had settled, the clock moved again. This time, it didn't move forward. It snapped backward all the way to April. Every change forced reporters, legal analysts, and industry watchers to stop and recalculate the numbers again. On paper, each update looks routine, just another bureaucratic adjustment inside a massive prison system. But the pattern tells a different story. Because when dates keep shifting like this, it stops looking like ordinary paperwork and starts feeling like someone is quietly adjusting the clock from the inside.
We think that a jury verdict should mean more than our jury's verdict seems to mean, and so we are planning to appeal.
At the center of that ticking clock sits a sentence that already left people scratching their heads the moment it was announced. Inside the courtroom, federal prosecutors pushed aggressively for more than 11 years behind bars. They argued that the alleged pattern of exploitation tied to Combs' private events wasn't just misconduct. It demanded a punishment strong enough to send a message across the entire industry. But when the gavel finally came down, the number looked very different. 50 months. That was the sentence. And even that number carried hidden flexibility. Once credits for time already served were factored in, the real stretch behind bars began shrinking fast, drifting closer to 3 years in practical terms. Alongside the prison term came a $500,000 fine and 5 years of supervised release. But for most observers, the financial penalties barely mattered. The real question was always the prison time. During sentencing, the courtroom watched Combs stand up and deliver a public apology to former partners and associates. He described his past behavior as disgusting, shameful, and sick. Those words exploded across headlines within minutes. For a moment, the story seemed perfectly packaged for the public. A fallen mogul, a moment of regret, a prison sentence that finally closed the chapter. But the deeper people looked, the less simple it felt. Because when prosecutors demand more than a decade, and the final punishment lands at just 50 months, eyebrows already start rising. And when that timeline begins shrinking even further once the prison doors close, when release dates start creeping forward inside the system, the question quietly shifts. Not whether he was punished, but whether the real consequences ever fully arrived at all.
4 years, 2 months in prison.
Wow.
He served a year. He gets some time. He gets 15% credit, so he'd be at 14-ish.
2.5 years.
2 months. So, and then he gets another 15% of the remaining.
Yeah.
He's out in 2 years.
Yeah. Should have stuck with the original game.
Inside Fort Dix, the official narrative paints a very controlled picture. According to reports, Shawn Combs spends his days inside the prison chapel library, cataloging books, organizing records, and helping with small administrative tasks. It's quiet work, structured, the kind of routine that signals cooperation with the system. His legal team actually pushed hard for this particular facility during sentencing. FCI Fort Dix offers two things that matter in federal prison strategy: proximity to family and access to specific rehabilitation programs. And one program in particular immediately caught attention: RDAP, the Residential Drug Abuse Program. Inside the federal system, RDAP isn't just therapy. It's one of the most powerful sentence reduction tools available to inmates. Successfully completing the program can cut up to an entire year off a federal sentence. Defense attorneys across the country know exactly how valuable that pathway is. For many inmates, it becomes the fastest way to shorten time without filing appeals or reopening the case. Through representatives, Combs Camp says his days follow a disciplined routine: reading, writing, exercising, attending counseling sessions, and participating in sobriety and accountability programs tied to RDAP. The message being presented to the public is clear: prison changes people. Supporters repeat that idea constantly, saying the environment has forced reflection, humility, and personal growth. On paper, it's the exact kind of rehabilitation story the federal system likes to highlight. A powerful figure falls, enters prison, reflects, and begins rebuilding. At least, that's the version everyone outside the walls is being shown.
Diddy, obviously just starting out his time, well, not just starting out, but starting out his official sentence since being sentenced not too long ago. And I think suffice to say, it's not going well so far.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, he's got 4 years and change that he's going to ultimately have to serve, although he has served already a year as he awaited his trial and then went through his trial.
But the story starts bending the moment other voices inside Fort Dix begin talking. A report suddenly surfaces claiming that Combs was caught with a fermented mixture made from Fanta, sugar, and apples, a homemade brew that quietly circulates inside federal prisons when inmates experiment with whatever ingredients they can find. Inside prison culture, it's nothing unusual. But in this case, it raises eyebrows. Sources claim prison staff initially considered moving him to another unit as punishment before the decision was quietly reversed. The timing makes the story even more complicated. Just weeks earlier, Combs had told the court something very different, that he was sober for the first time in 25 years. In a letter to the judge, he described a personal transformation that he said began behind bars. The old version of me faded in jail, and new version of me was reborn. The quote spread across headlines almost instantly, a perfectly crafted symbol of redemption. Then the fermented drink rumor appeared and quietly cracked that image. Inside prison systems, contradictions move faster than official statements ever do. Guards hear things. Inmates repeat them. Stories leak out piece by piece. And people on the outside start asking whether the redemption narrative is completely organic or carefully constructed. Then another voice enters the story. Former NBA player Sebastian Telfair, who recently completed his own federal sentence, walks out of the same facility and speaks openly about what he saw inside Fort Dix. According to Telfair, Combs looked comfortable. He said the mogul was holding it down and staying in good spirits while navigating prison life. That phrase spreads through entertainment outlets almost immediately. To supporters, it sounds like resilience, proof that he's staying mentally strong. But critics hear something else. A reminder that the man who once controlled entire rooms, hosted extravagant parties, and built a business empire might still carry a certain level of influence, even inside a federal institution. Telfair also pointed out the dramatic contrast between Combs' old life, one built around late nights, luxury, and excess, and the slow, controlled rhythm of incarceration. The implication is that prison forces reflection. But the tone of the interview never describes someone broken by consequences. Instead, it sounds like someone adapting quickly, learning the rules, figuring out how the system works. And that adaptability is exactly where the conversation starts getting sharper. Because federal prisons run on incentives. Good behavior earns credits. Participation in programs opens doors to earlier release dates. And in certain cases, cooperation with investigators can unlock opportunities that never appear on public paperwork. None of those possibilities are officially attached to the updated release date on the Bureau of Prisons database. On the surface, the date simply changes. But people who follow high-profile federal cases closely start asking the same quiet question. What else is happening around this sentence that the public hasn't seen yet? During the trial, prosecutors described a network of events tied to the so-called freak-offs, gatherings involving partners, performers, and elaborate arrangements that investigators argued crossed the line from private behavior into criminal territory. Witness testimony introduced disturbing allegations, coercion, control, and violent outbursts. Those claims became the backbone of the prosecution's push for a decade-long prison sentence. But when that request collapsed into just 50 months, and the calendar inside prison kept shrinking even further, the gap between expectation and reality started feeling impossible to ignore. And the bigger that gap grows, the more people begin wondering what part of the story still hasn't been told.
Those things that you just said are also included in the racketeering count. So we don't know what the vote is. It's hard to read what they...
Outside the prison walls, the fallout refuses to slow down. While Shawn Combs sits inside Fort Dix, the legal storm surrounding his empire keeps expanding. Civil litigation tied to the scandal is still multiplying. Case after case appearing in court filings, each one adding another layer to a story that refuses to close. One lawsuit in particular grabs immediate attention. It involves Combs' son, Christian Combs, and a yacht worker named Grace Omar. According to the complaint, an encounter aboard a chartered vessel allegedly escalated into an attempted forced act. The lawsuit doesn't just name Christian. It also names Shawn Combs himself. The filing accuses the father of creating and enabling the environment where the alleged incident unfolded in the first place. Even from behind bars, his name remains tied directly to the accusations. And that's not the only legal fight unfolding. Separate court records reveal a dispute between the Combs family and a law firm called Summa LLP. The firm claims it was never fully paid for legal work tied to the growing number of cases surrounding the scandal. According to the documents, the unpaid balance reached more than $53,000, covering over 100 attorney hours and nearly 90 hours of paralegal work. The conflict eventually settled quietly, without a drawn-out courtroom battle. But the details still adds another piece to the larger picture. An empire still dealing with legal fires on multiple fronts. Because even with the patriarch sitting in a federal prison cell, the machine around him hasn't stopped moving. The lawsuits keep coming. The financial pressure keeps building. The legal battles keep shifting arenas. And for observers watching closely, one thing becomes clear. The consequences of this scandal were never confined to a single courtroom or a single prison sentence.
And a lot of people saying it's square peg, round hole, that we know that there are multiple jurors on both sides. It's not just one holdout, that on racketeering, they are stuck. But they have reached a decision on trafficking as it results with...
Meanwhile, the cultural fallout adds another layer of tension. Because while the legal battles unfold in courtrooms, the story is also playing out in public. And the internet is making sure it never fades from view. One of the loudest voices comes from rival rapper Curtis Jackson, better known as 50 Cent. Throughout the federal trial, and even after sentencing, Jackson repeatedly mocks the Combs family online. Posts, captions, memes, each one turning the scandal into viral entertainment that spreads across social media within minutes. Then the situation escalates. At one point, Christian Combs fires back in a comment, calling 50 Cent a senior citizen. The insult references a complicated history involving Jackson's former partner, Daphne Joy, and an alleged romantic overlap tied to Shawn Combs. Within hours, the exchange becomes another headline. On the surface, it looks like a classic hip-hop feud, the kind of back and forth that has fueled rap culture for decades. But the timing makes it feel very different. Because the Combs name is now tied to federal convictions, civil lawsuits, and a growing wave of documentaries revisiting past allegations. Every online jab, every viral post, every sarcastic caption keeps the scandal circulating through the entertainment ecosystem. It prevents the story from cooling down, and the image it creates is strange. On one side, Christian Combs is online trying to defend the family name. On the other side, his father is sitting inside Fort Dix, serving a federal sentence. It creates a surreal split-screen moment. One version of the story unfolds in courtrooms, prison facilities, and legal filings. The other unfolds through memes, feuds, and viral clips spreading across the internet. And together, both sides keep the narrative alive, making sure the scandal never fully disappears from public view.
17 in the Diddy trial as the biggest one yet. Guess what? Bingo, you won, because today was probably the most eventful day as far as things that happened that were said on the stand, and most importantly, things that the judge said, because Diddy almost got kicked out of.
Then another thread from the past resurfaces and refuses to stay buried. Former Diddy Kane member Aubrey O'Day appears in a documentary that re-examines years of accusations tied to Shawn Combs' influence inside the music industry. What begins as a retrospective quickly turns darker when the film introduces a document from deep in the archives. An affidavit describing an alleged studio incident from 2005. According to the document, the situation involved intoxication, nudity, and disturbing behavior involving multiple men inside a recording studio environment. In the documentary, O'Day reads the affidavit aloud, slowly, carefully, as the weight of the moment starts settling in. She admits something unsettling. She doesn't clearly remember the event, but after seeing the document, she says she begins questioning parts of her own history. O'Day also recounts receiving explicit messages from Combs during the peak of her career with Diddy Kane. In her view, rejecting those advances may have played a role in what happened next. Her sudden removal from the group in 2008. For years, that departure was framed as a simple industry dispute. Now, the documentary forces viewers to reconsider whether something deeper was happening behind the scenes. And the timing of the film is impossible to ignore. It arrives after the federal criminal case has already concluded, after the sentencing, after the headlines, after the prison doors have closed. But the emotional fallout clearly hasn't ended. While watching the documentary footage that reconstructs the allegations, O'Day says she began hyperventilating and crying. The experience forced her to confront memories she's still struggling to fully process. Even now, she says she wrestles with the same question many others have quietly asked throughout the scandal: whether justice for experiences like that ever truly arrives. Her voice adds another layer to the atmosphere surrounding the case. A reminder that while the prison timeline quietly shifts in the background, the deeper impact of the story continues unfolding far beyond the courtroom.
Same kind of extortion that we heard when Cassie took the stand and testified on that airplane ride back from France. Diddy said, "You don't do a freak off, I'm going to release one of the freak off videos that you are profiled in." And
that atmosphere matters because federal sentencing rarely happens in isolation. Judges don't just look at the charges. They look at the bigger picture: reputation, influence, public accountability, and the message a sentence sends beyond the courtroom. In Shawn Combs' case, prosecutors spent weeks building a very specific narrative. They described what they called a pattern of intimidation and manipulation tied to his relationships with partners, employees, and people moving through his private circles. According to the government, Combs' wealth and celebrity created environments where control was easy, rooms where the power imbalance was so extreme that dangerous behavior could unfold without resistance. They argued that the system needed to respond with a punishment strong enough to break that dynamic. When the judge finally delivered the sentence, those concerns were acknowledged directly. The court stated that the punishment needed to send a clear message about exploitation and violence against women, and about the responsibility that comes with power. But when the final number landed, the courtroom reaction was immediate. 50 months, a sentence dramatically lower than the more than 11 years prosecutors had fought for. At the time, it looked like the end of the negotiation. The decision had been made. The gavel had fallen. But now, with the projected release date quietly creeping closer inside the prison system, that moment is being re-examined from a very different angle. Because the contradiction keeps getting sharper. If the prosecution argued for over a decade, and the judge delivered less than 5 years, and the timeline inside prison keeps shrinking even further, people start asking a new question. Was the original sentence already the compromise? Or did the real negotiations only begin after the courtroom cameras turned off and the prison gates closed?
This job was a upgrade. He took a massive pay cut. He was an accomplished litigator. He has a pedigree that most law students would envy, and he's a very, very brilliant man.
This is where the story starts bending in ways that statistics alone cannot explain. The Bureau of Prisons database quietly updates. No press conferences, no public statements, no explanations. Rehabilitation programs hum along in the background. Civil lawsuits continue stacking up, one after another. Old wounds resurface in documentaries. Rival artists keep mocking the downfall. And through it all, the calendar keeps shifting. 1 month disappears from the sentence. Then another. Inside federal systems, changes like this rarely happen without paperwork and justification. But the public almost never sees that paperwork until years later. Observers begin connecting dots that never appear on the same page. If a man who once faced over a decade behind bars ends up serving something closer to 3 years, and that timeline keeps quietly shrinking, the question becomes impossible to ignore. Who benefits from those changes? What unseen processes move through the system to make them possible? The weight of this story isn't just the shrinking sentence. It's everything orbiting it. Long before the conviction, the public record around Shawn Combs was already saturated with accusations, sworn statements, and stories that once seemed too extreme to escape the music industry's inner circle. Then the trial shattered that barrier. Witness testimony detailed control, intimidation, and carefully orchestrated private gatherings, moments where celebrity lifestyle blurred into criminal behavior. The verdict seemed to contain the legal consequences to a single federal sentence. But the broader storm never stopped. Civil complaints continue stacking across multiple jurisdictions, many tied to events stretching back years. And the echoes keep coming. Aubrey O'Day, revisiting an affidavit in a documentary, describes a studio incident that hits her physically before she can fully process it. Her brutal realization raises a question that haunts every new development inside the prison system. How many people knew fragments of this world existed, but never grasped the full picture until now? And then there's power. The music industry never moves without it. Combs built Bad Boy Records into a cultural engine, shaping hip-hop, fashion, and celebrity culture for decades. That influence didn't just elevate artists. It built a network of loyalty, access, and control. Former collaborators, executives, security personnel, and party guests all orbited that world at one point or another. When investigators began pulling that network apart, they weren't just examining one man's actions. They were dissecting an environment, a system of influence that touched countless lives. Even now, whispers circulate across entertainment circles that the real story involves far more names than anyone has seen in court documents. The question floating in those conversations isn't just about Combs himself. It's about what information exists behind the scenes. When a figure with decades of connections faces federal pressure and then watches the timeline of his sentence quietly shift, speculation comes naturally. Some see it as a sign of quiet cooperation. Others chalk it up to the complex mechanics of federal sentencing programs. But the rumors persist because the system rarely explains itself publicly while cases unfold, leaving the entire situation suspended in a kind of surreal limbo. The mogul who once dominated award stages now sits behind federal walls, while lawsuits, documentaries, interviews, and resurfacing allegations continue expanding the story outside of them. Supporters insist on rehabilitation and personal change. Critics point to testimony, affidavits, and a growing list of civil complaints. Meanwhile, the calendar tied to his sentence keeps moving in ways that defy easy interpretation. So here's the question no one can answer yet. What is really happening behind those prison walls right now? Are investigators still quietly pulling information from a man who spent decades at the center of a vast entertainment network? Or is the shrinking timeline just another twist in a system the public barely understands? And if more names, details, or incidents surface in the future, how many people who once stood close to that empire will suddenly find themselves pulled into the same spotlight? I want to know what you think. Drop your theories in the comments. Where do you land on this one?